pleased to welcome my guest today. He was an alderman, as they were called, in the city of Kitchener from 1979 to 1989. He beat out an incumbent alderman to win the ward in his first political race, and he successfully ran for re-election until his retirement in 1989. He spent time as an alderman on Kitchener Council, and he also spent time as a councillor for the region of Waterloo. He ran for the Progressive Conservative Party in the provincial election in 1986. He did all this while building his law practice. He has since gone on to develop one of the most successful real estate law practices in not only Waterloo Region, but arguably one of the largest and most successful real estate law practices in Canada. I was fortunate to build my own law practice in association with his for a number of years. I'm pleased to welcome a man of boundless, youthful energy to the Old Grey Mares podcast, my friend, Don Travers. Don, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I was just thinking, building a law practice while in municipal politics, I probably should have talked to you a little more before I decided to run the first time.
Well, I think I told you that I didn't think that was the way to success, because, I mean, people think of you either as a politician or as a lawyer. And a friend of mine, late 80s, told me that I couldn't be both. I had to be one or the other. Right. And he suggested that I should be the lawyer because I'd make a lot more money.
Right.
And of course, I thought that, well, I didn't go to school for 7 years and want to be a lawyer from the age of 5 years old to then give it all up so I could be a politician.
Right.
So I took his advice, and he was right. So every time I get into my Bentley, I think of it. I thank him for that really sound advice.
Yeah.
As a lawyer.
It's funny you said 5 years old, because I remember growing up. Okay, so my parents came to Canada in the 50s, dad from Germany, mom from Italy, and met in Kitchener. But it was sort of ingrained in my head by my Italian immigrant mother that I was going to be a lawyer from age 7 on. And I always say it was like we were watching Perry Mason all the time. And so it was sort of ingrained in me to become a lawyer. So we've got some similar paths that way. But let me ask you though, Don, where did you grow up? What part of the country?
Well, my family's from the Gaspé Coast. So that's a very poor area of the province of Quebec. And I grew up in Montreal and on the Gaspé Coast. I spent my summers on the Gaspé Coast, working on my grandfather's farms and fishing. And we'd go out in the evenings and early in the mornings and fish. And then during the day we do a lot of haying, that type of thing, And,
right.
So I learned to drive tractors and trucks at a young age. So when I got to get my driver's license at 16, they asked me whether I wanted a learner's permit. And I said, no, I don't need a learner's permit. I was a little taken back. But anyways, he sent me out on the road with a driver instructor, and I came back and had my license.
Yeah, that's a common story about people growing up on the farms, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And my grandfather was really an incredible man. Well, he was not my real grandfather. He was a step grandfather, I guess. My father's father died before he was born, actually. But he was very entrepreneurial. But he also he would get up very early in the morning and be on the farm. But when he drove, he would fall asleep driving. So if I was in the car, he would ask me to drive. So I was driving at a very young age.
Oh my gosh.
It was safer for me to drive than it was for him to drive, because he's always driving into the ditch. So, they said, well, you go drive. So I would, one of the things he did was he was a horse trader, and he used to sell horses into the lumber camps, because in those days they didn't have the mechanized equipment we have today. So the horses were the means of moving the pulp out of the woods. So he would, in the fall, we would go to Prince Edward Island, and he'd had lots of these big draft horses on his own farms. We would bring horses in from Prince Edward Island, and he would go into the backwoods and sell these to these lumber.
Oh, okay, wow.
And then in the springtime, we'd go back and we'd buy them back for half the price, and we'd put them on his farms, and
right.
The summer on the farms, and I had a great time. Because I would ride these big draft horses.
Yeah, you're reusing and recycling horses.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was, he had a lot of interesting things, and I suppose that's when I was first exposed to politics, really, because I mean, if you're English, and we didn't consider ourselves Anglos in those days, we were English.
Right.
And if you were English, you were liberal. And I remember my grandfather, one of the things he did was he used to build the fishing wharfs along the south shore of the Gaspé Coast in the Bay of Chaleur. And that was when the Liberals were in power federally, and it was a federal responsibility. And then when they lost to John Diefenbaker, of course, he lost all those contracts.
Oh,
But then Jean Lesage beat the Union Nationale and the Liberal Premier Jean Lesage,
right.
Union Nationale.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, my grandfather was doing bridges, building bridges over the rivers. And I asked him, I said, well, Grandpa, we used to build docks. Now you're building, what do you know about building bridges? And he simply said, I don't have to know anything about building bridges. I have to just know the man that hands out the contract.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because there's stories about miles of paving of roads sort of based on who's in power and how much miles of road is getting paved in a particular riding or not. So very interesting. That's a great story. But you ended up in Toronto at some point, right? Was that following how did you end up in Toronto?
Well, growing up in Montreal and in the Gaspé, then in Montreal, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. And my grandfather used to tell me I was going to be a lawyer because I asked so damn many questions. That's always going to be a Philadelphia lawyer. And so it sort of stuck. And I thought, well, that's probably a good thing for me to be. I mean, everybody thinks I'm, asking,
right.
I always cross-examine them. But I knew that, there was greener pastures outside of Quebec, because in Quebec at the time in the 60s, I mean, the English people had their lawyers, the French people had their lawyers, the Jewish people had their lawyers. Everything was sort of segregated,
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a lot different now. But I mean, I belonged to an English golf course. Well, we didn't have any French members. We didn't have any Jewish members. And,
the 60s were it's a culmination of a lot of stuff that's changed a lot since then. Unfortunately,
unfortunately, back then there's still anti-Semitism. But
yeah.
And English people were stiff upper lip, etc. And the French Canadians were supposedly loud. The Jewish people were loud. I mean, it was all this is the type of
it's
sort of shocking when you think about it. But that's where we grew up. So I just thought that there were more opportunities in Ontario, and I just and also sort of being always politically interested, I just knew that. In Quebec, it was always language. It's always language. And, I would always think that politicians only have so much energy, and any political party has so much energy.
Right.
So your energy is being devoted to the language issues, etc. You're not going to have, the power. You're not going to have the time to spend really on the nuts and bolts issues of,
You're more interested in the economic issues than the language, social, that type of issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Ontario and had to get a senior matric. I went to Queens, had to get a senior matric, to get into Ontario. But I mean, we only go to grade 11 in Quebec at the time, so I had to get a grade 12 certificate, and then I was able to go to Queens. And I always knew I was going to be a lawyer, so I sort of streamlined through that. I didn't want to take a 4-year thing. I just 3 years and bang.
Yep.
In fact, I almost did 2 years, and then bang right into law school.
Okay. So out of law school, then did you start with a Toronto area firm before you came to Kitchener?
Yeah. And then but it in those days, and it's probably still today. I mean, you just, young lawyers, you always worked. I worked 6.5 days a week.
Yeah.
And four nights of the week, I would have dinner with my senior partner. I worked for a big firm that specialized in tax law, a big Montreal firm that had a Toronto office.
Okay.
Specialized in tax law, and I was interested in that. But every night I'd have dinner, and I'd see my wife on Friday night. Friday night. So, and she was a teacher up in North York. So, after a year of that, or a year and a half of that, it just wasn't working out. She just made it clear that this is not what I bargained for, and so we had to move. And so then I was looking for other opportunities, and I didn't want to be in a bedroom of Toronto. I thought, well, I'm going to work in Toronto. I mean, I worked in the 52nd floor of the Commerce Court. I didn't want to, be in a bedroom. So I probably would, if I had been smart, I would have gone to Mississauga because it was undeveloped.
It was, but it had a boom, that's for sure.
I went to Kitchener Waterloo because it was the fastest growing community in Canada. And I also came to an Oktoberfest up here, and I thought, man, these people know how to have a good
Oh, there you go. Oktoberfest.
Oktoberfest. That was part of it, and so that's what landed me here. So I got a job with a big firm in Waterloo, and I was very fortunate. I had a very good mentor. His name was Jack Harper, and so I
Oh,
learned
yeah.
and I worked there. But then I sort of, I got the political bug. I was one of the jobs I had was there was a landowner around the airport, and he had
Yes.
thousands of acres of land, and it was going to be industrial land, which made a lot of sense for the region, actually. So he wanted to do a land bank. So I had worked in Toronto. I had worked on the first real estate investment trust in Canada.
Oh,
So I had familiarity with that type of thing. So I spent months working on this thing and submitted it to the Ontario Securities Commission and got back a one-page deficiency letter, which was quite shocking because my experience was that these things came back and
you were doing really good work at the time. All that time with the senior lawyer helped out a lot.
the funny thing was I called up the Ontario Securities Commission and I said to the guy there, and I said, like, I don't understand this. I mean, one page and you want me to change like three things. Like I've never seen something like this before in my life. Why isn't there
Yeah.
more wrong with this? Like I didn't quite put it that way. And he said, well, we've never had a land bank before, so we really don't know
Oh,
how to question it or how to deal with this.
right.
I said, great. So it went to market, but unfortunately, the people that were doing that end of it, they weren't experts in securities and they didn't know how to prime the market.
Uh,
So I mean,
so what was the interest was so, or?
yeah, it wasn't great. We had a big opening at Westmount Golf Course, and we had all the
Right.
newspapers at the time, Harold Ford, and a lot of other well-known people, but nobody really bought in. I think it was structured too much in favor of the owner of the lands.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, it's still going on. There's people still involved in that now, but it's still going on. But it never really took off. And but then I learned how to learn a lot about municipal politics and
Yeah,
stuff.
let me just ask you, this is 1974, around 74, 75 when this is going
This
on?
would be sort of no. This would probably be in 78, 79.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're seeing a lot about local municipal politics because you're dealing with zoning issues and other things,
Yeah,
correct?
and and servicing issues, and where
Ah,
it should go, and of course the way it should have been serviced was like a Grand River trunk, a trunk sewer coming up the Grand River, perfect, it's gravity feed and everything else, and that would have served, and that would have served the Woolwich, but it also would have served the east side of Kitchener. And right now,
ah,
all the development, and there was no development there, like the Sims Estate. There was no development there at the time,
yep.
but that would have serviced that area, and it would have all been gravity fed. But now that all these properties along the Grand River, they all have to have pumping stations to
Yeah.
pump it out to get it so they can gravity feed it. So it would have been a boon to the city of Kitchener too, to have the big trunk sewer, and it would have been a boon to Woolwich. But of course, the regional government, they didn't see it that way, and of course, the townships are never. They're never always that helpful.
Well, we're not as well off financially, but let me just ask you. So you're working on this project 78, 79. You're learning a little bit more about local municipal politics and the people you're dealing with, but you're also involved in some community association too, aren't you? In your
Yeah,
neighborhood,
yeah. I was involved in the West Heights Community Association, and there was, some really great people there. One was Marge Strong, uh,
right?
very dynamic lady, and she was involved in that. So I got involved in that, and then when the municipal election came up, I had just finished this land bank thing, and so I had been working on that for months just exclusively. So I had some time and I had some experience, and a number of the people that I'd come across in learning this had suggested that I should run because the council needed, somebody like me on it. So,
Okay, what did they mean by that? What did you take that to mean? Somebody
well,
like you?
these were obviously business people. So
Yeah,
they thought they needed somebody that had a business, and I guess they thought that maybe I had something can contribute, like from my knowledge that I'd learned from the land bank, and just that,
yeah.
I had something to contribute. I don't know, but I mean that's what they said.
But there was already an alderman in the ward you were looking to run, correct?
Yeah, well, they were just going from citywide to the wards at that time.
Oh, so just prior it was citywide.
So citywide. So yeah, my opponent, And of course, you know, if I had been, I mean, I'd only been in the community for, I guess, 5 years, 4.5 years,
Right. Yeah.
years. So if I had have been probably in the community longer, I would have realized that it was pretty much, you know, a losing proposition to
You
run
were,
it.
you were too dumb to know better.
That's exactly right. I think that's right. I was too dumb to know better. So I thought, well, what the heck? I'll throw my hat in the ring. And I had I had sort of studied political science, and I read a lot, and I had seen a picture of John Buchanan, who was the premier of Nova Scotia, and he just won an election down in Nova Scotia. And on the second page of the Globe and Mail, they had a picture of John Buchanan, and he was holding up a sign. He was standing beside a road, holding up a sign saying, "Thank you."
Oh,
I thought that was brilliant. You know, he just won. Here he's holding up a sign thanking the people. And I'm thinking, well, that'll get him reelected.
right.
I thought, well, I wonder if I held up a sign beside the road
Yeah.
before the election, whether that would help me, because I know that when I was in Toronto, it was all name recognition. I mean, when I voted for the city councillor, well, I voted for the guy's name who I knew.
Incumbency, right? We're talking about incumbency, basically.
Exactly. It's all about name recognition. So if you're an incumbent, you have a huge advantage over any newcomer. And that's why there's not a lot of change in municipal politics.
And the person you were running against was Mac Voisin, who
Yeah.
would have been elected citywide previously, but this was the first time he was going to have to run as the sort of the incumbent in the ward you were in.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, obviously people told me he was well known, and I mean, he comes from a large family, family.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't know that at the time per se, but I knew he was a nice guy. He's about the same age as I am, and he's a nice guy. And I've met his father afterwards when I was on the St. Mary's Hospital board, and his father, Frank Voisin, actually, you know, and I knew this at the time, I guess, built most of Forest Hill, which was part of the ward.
Yeah.
And Mac lived there, and Frank, I think, lived in the same area. And you know, just really a solid family. I mean, I've met his brother since then, Greg, and you know, there's Guy.
Lots of generations very active still in the community and development and everything else.
You know, really, you know, a great family, great people, and Mac's a great guy. And as I said, I probably wasn't smart enough to realize that I was really I didn't uphill battle. But I thought, well, I'm going to try this. So I stood on street corners. I got up early in the morning and I parked a sandwich board sign that said "Vote for me," a Don Travers type of thing, and stood beside it and waved at cars coming out of up McGarry, because that was the main feeder out of the Forest Heights subdivision, or West Heights, I guess, Forest Heights, and then there was
it was a lot smaller back then. You're right.
Oh, yeah, and then I would go to, you know, like over to Greenbrook, you know, from Greenbrook on to Westmount Road and Queens Boulevard, et cetera. And I'd bounce around, and you know, the first couple of mornings, well, I mean, I felt like an idiot. You know, who is this nut? What am I doing out here? I'm waving at people, and everybody started looking at, you know, like, what is this guy doing? But interestingly enough, after 3 or 4 days, people started smiling and waving back. And I didn't give them the Queen's wave. I mean, I actually looked into the car, looked into their eyes, and you know, made contact. And after about 2 weeks, I thought, you know, this is really working. And my campaign manager was Bob Bryson, another lawyer, and Bob was a liberal. And
I was going to say, I'm guessing you ran provincially as a progressive conservative. Bob Bryson is a well-known liberal. So that's interesting that you're cutting across party lines with this campaign.
Yeah, well, I wasn't really anything. I wasn't a member of any party. And, you know, I was just sort of, I guess you'd call me a moderate. And
right.
So I had, and Bob put me in touch with a lady, a big liberal organizer, Elaine Reese, and she was very helpful.
Elaine, yes.
And then I also, I don't know how I knew, but I knew a conservative lady, Jean Foster, who was, you know, vice president of the provincial party, et cetera, and a good conservative. So I mean, they're very helpful, putting me in touch with people. And I just kept on standing on street corners. If it rained, I'd stand when people were coming home too. And if it rained, it was even better. You know, I'd put an umbrella.
More sympathy.
That guy's dumb, but he really wants this job. You know?
Yeah.
So,
but your campaign was more than just that, right? I mean, you did some other stuff.
I went door to door, and I had a pamphlet. In fact, I think the Record, and I took it as a bit of a slap in the face, but the Record said that my campaign was slick. And I think it was just because I like everything I've done, I've tried to apply sort of like just basic business sense to things.
Right. Right.
you know, the little literature piece wasn't much, but it was, people hadn't done that before. So that was sort of, it was slick.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. You're really rocking the apple cart here.
Yeah, I'm just sort of applying sort of what you would do if you were, a candidate, a
Yeah.
provincial candidate, or federal candidate. And anyways, and then I also got the directory, and I got people, I got like a phone bank going. Once again, I got a phone bank going. So on election day, I had people, I figured, well, I'm out there, so people are going to know my name now. I've got
Yeah.
name recognition now. So we basically just, looked at there was a directory at the time that had, addresses and names. So we just looked in the various ward, we looked at the names in the ward, and we just called people and said, have you been out to vote, or you want to vote for me?
Right. Yep.
And can we help you? Can we give you a ride or something?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But they had never done this like on a citywide campaign. So so I think that's why the record said it was kind of slick, because I was actually doing what you would do at a higher level.
Yeah, and you did. You called it tea parties or coffee parties as well, get-togethers, like neighborhood get-togethers.
Yeah, Marg knew a lot of people, and she would connect with other people, and I would go to coffee parties. But I was really exhausted. I can't remember. It was one coffee party, and I started answering a question, and I forgot completely, what the answer was. I think
what the question was.
It was like wow, So.
Well, it is a lot of hard work. It's funny because as you're describing all of this, and this is a campaign in like 1979, when I ran in 2010, I did a lot, except for the waving with the poster stuff. I did a lot of the stuff you're talking about, and a lot of it hadn't even been done in the townships by 2010 before. It's just people. I think that's one of the things when you look at municipal politics versus provincial or federal. Municipal politics is really the person with a handful of people helping out. There's no party politics, no machine, no organization behind you to help get you, your brochures and your policy platforms and your website set up or what have you today. And that really, municipal politics is almost like a raw, you're naked, you're there, you're on your own, you're in the spotlight, and you have nothing else to back you up. Plus, you have to do everything. You're the head waiter down to the bottle washer.
Yeah, and like I had people working with me that were really helpful. Like but you're right, and that's the nice thing about it, because then you can be yourself. You're not tied into anybody else's policies. You can just be yourself.
Yeah.
People elect the person basically, and of course, the key thing is the name recognition, though, and
that's right. Because incumbency is like, well, this, I'm relatively happy with how the municipalities run. This guy's been there or this girl's been there. I know the name. Let's just put him back in, right? Unless there's some controversy. But we'll talk about the neutrality of it all a little bit later on. So I guess you did Mac Voisin a favor by beating him.
Well, yeah, on election eve, I just sort of steamrolled the whole thing, and I think if you counted up my votes, I could have been elected in half the city. It was really quite surprising. I mean, it wasn't close, and the end result was I think people were shocked. Certainly, people in the law firm that I worked for were shocked, because they didn't think that I was going to win or anything like that. But it turned out to be good for Mac, and we've laughed about. I've talked about this to Mac a couple of times. That because he lost, he had nothing to do, so he set up M&M meets with his brother-in-law Mac Moak at the time. And Mac is incredibly successful, and I'm just a poor lawyer.
Yeah. But M&M Meats, M&M Meats is wildly successful. You're doing very well too, but it's something else. So, okay, now you're elected. Tell me what it was like being the new person on council.
Well, it wasn't really popular, because most of the other councillors that got elected were previous councillors, and they were friends with Mac Voisin.
Oh, so okay.
So there is an election. The city of Kitchener sends 8 of the councillors, 8 aldermen, we call them then, 8 elders, to the regional council as councillors. And
out of how many? 8 out of how many?
Out of 10.
8 of 10. At that time, 8 of 10 would be voted to regional council.
Yeah. And it was a vote of the council.
Yeah.
So I was told, well, don't really campaign, like you're new, so don't campaign. And of course, I wasn't elected to the regional council the first time. It was 2-year term, because I guess they weren't crazy about the fact that I beat back. And, obviously with the votes I got, et cetera, probably would be an indication that maybe I should have gone.
Yeah.
The people that they elected, they went, and that was fine. I had, then I had other things to do, obviously.
Who was the mayor when you first elected?
When I was first elected, the mayor was Morley Rosenberg.
Oh, there's a name.
Yeah. Morley, I always got along well with Morley, but Morley was a firebrand. Morley had strong views, and,
Yeah.
I remember, Morley would, the fire department would want to do something at the Concordia Club because of the crowds and that. And Morley said, just leave them alone. He'd get the fire chief in and say, just remember who you work for. And Morley was pretty outspoken, and but good guy. Got along well with Morley.
So your interest when you got on council was finance, right? That was your big interest.
Well, it was finance, and it was also like industrial development, because the thing that got me into it in the first place was this big land bank idea in industrial land.
Right.
So that was my interest, and so that's sort of what I worked towards. And I guess you would say that I was sort of a business. Well, I was a business voice on the council.
Yes.
And so I really promoted the industrial development. And one of the big things at the time, though, was the center in the square. It was just sort of at the cusp of being approved.
Yeah, we'll talk about, I don't want to talk about that right now, though. Okay, yeah. We'll talk about that after. So yeah. I want to stick on the finance theme first, because when you're first, this is the thing I experienced now, because I was elected mayor, I was on regional council right away. And, but I had never done a municipal budget before. And this was a brand new experience for me and a really different thing. What was the experience like for you having to do that?
Well, it was kind of interesting because the first budget comes up and, we get these books, and there really was nothing nothing to really inform you of what was going on. It was just lines and okay, we're going to increase this by X number. I was sort of across the board. And I talked to my brother. My brother was a partner and an accountant, and he had been sent to work for the Auditor General. They do that with their partners. Each of the big firms have to, send partners
right.
to work with the Auditor General. And I don't know whether they get paid or not, but anyways, that's what he did. And at the time, the federal government was going through zero-based budgeting. And I thought this was a hell of a good idea. So I talked to my brother, and my brother sent me the information on this. So when I got the information from the city, I thought, well, this is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything to me. I'm new, yes, but there's all these lines, and the only thing we seem to be talking about is the grants. Like whether we give somebody $1,000 or we give them 500 or 750 or whatever.
Oh, so the whole operating and capital side of it didn't seem to have the same attention from a counselor perspective as whether I'm giving $1,000 to the social planning council or something like that.
It had no attention at all, because you couldn't deal with it, and it was millions and millions of dollars, and you couldn't deal with it. But I went and I called in some of the other counselors, and I said, well, the other new counselors, I said, this doesn't make any sense to me. We're not really examining the budget. We're not seeing whether something should be continued or not continued, or whether we should build a community center or a park, or like a trail here or whatever. What is the use? There should be more facts to it.
Let me just ask you, zero-based budgeting, what is that? Sort of just a rough definition or idea.
The bottom line of that is that you look at line by line and you say, okay, do we have to do this? You go back to zero. So rather than starting at like $100,000 and adding 3 or 4 or 5% to it, you say, no, we're going to start at zero, and then we're going to build it up and see, okay, what service are we providing? Do we have to provide this service? Do we have to, what level of service do we have to provide, and at to what degree, how much?
Okay, and then as you add, you're moving beyond zero-based.
Yeah. So that you start,
or take away.
Well, that's right. You start at zero,
yeah,
and then you go up, or you say, well, it's not necessary. It's not performing the function that we thought it was. So it's not just rubber stamping everything, and that's
right.
basically what the council was doing before, and what the finance department of Kitchener would expect it to be done.
Well, who was present? This is always an interesting topic for me. Is who runs a municipality? Staff, the council, what, so when you were getting the budgets back then, was it a elected councillor who was the chair of the finance committee presenting it, or it was coming via the director of finance, for example, or the treasurer?
Well, it came from the finance department, Bobby. That came from the commissioner, and his assistant at the time, or the deputy commissioner, was John Gazzola.
Oh, wow. That's, yeah, John, that's a while back.
And so it's a while back, and John's still involved now. And
yeah.
And that was the problem. Sure. Well, the bureaucrats ran the thing,
Yeah.
and the councillor really, since they didn't have the information, they were just rubber stamping some kind of an increase on all of these accounts. And so the zero-based budgeting says, no, it has to be examined, and you have to determine whether you want to continue using that and that. And in most cases, of course, you do. You still need your parts in that, but it's at least understanding what you're spending the money on.
Right. So you were trying to change the way budgets were being done at the city of Kitchener.
Absolutely, and we did. And this
that's a classic. This is how we always do things. Don't rock the boat moment.
Well, yeah, no, I rocked the boat. Morley Rosenberg called me into his office and started ranting and raving. I wasn't going to take any crap from Morley, but it's not, one lawyer. At least, he got into a fight with another lawyer and he threw him out of his office down the stairs. So, fortunately, there was no stairs for him to throw me down, but he was really pissed off.
Yeah.
I had just completely, upended the whole process. So they started over again. And, John Gazzola was pretty upset, as I understand. And Bob Eby came to me and said, you really upset John, et cetera. And I said, well, that's unfortunate. But what we're presented really is not helpful. It's not meaningful.
So council accepted the process you were suggesting?
Yeah.
Okay. Who were some of the new councillors? Because you said you got together with some of the new councillors at the time. Do you remember some of the?
Well, there was Judy Balmer, and she was the center ward. She was like around Victoria Park, actually lived on Victoria Park, nice city. And her husband was, he was sort of into recreational, I think. Recreational, he was sort of a recreation consultant.
Okay.
Gary Ledston. Now, Gary was on the east side of the city.
Yeah.
And he ended up becoming a provincial.
Yes, he ran provincially, yeah, and was elected, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't remember the others, but yeah, so there, we got together, and there was this cabal, so like Marlon Rosenberg really went nuts, but then, he settled down and thought, there's going to be said for this, and I convinced people that this is the way it should be done. So after that, that's the way it was done. And then, of course, when I became elected to the regional council 2 years later,
yeah,
then we implemented this at the region too.
So let me just before we go there, overall, by going through with this zero base, you were able to accomplish budgetary increases that were at or below inflation, or what was the outcome?
I thought, maybe there's not a lot of kudos to being a fiscal conservative, but I just thought that, we should be running things under the rate of inflation. So every year we did. So one year we were, I don't know which year it was now, probably the second or third time around, we were short. But in those days, interest rates were very high. So, on the taxes, we got a pretty good return. So I asked the finance department, so see, rather than the bureaucrats know anything, now I'm bringing the budget to people, and I'm going through the police budget at the region, and I'm suggesting, and in the city of Kitchener anyways, I was able to get, support for my ideas. Now at the region, I never really accomplished what I wanted to accomplish at the region, because quite frankly, it was the township people and Ken Sealy.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a sec. I've got it down here to talk about that.
So we were able to keep the rate of inflation, but one year, the way I did it was I moved up the tax period. So rather than, you have your 2 installments and there are 4 installments, and the third one was the first of, the third one was in, I guess it was around August or September, and the fourth one was in October. So I said, well, rather than having the fourth one in October, what do we save? What interest do we make on the taxes? Yeah. We move it up to September. And lo and behold, we saved just what I wanted. We saved a couple of points so that we could come in below the fleet. So that's why in Kitchener, and then of course Waterloo adopted this. Everybody adopted it
Yeah.
except the townships in the area. Your final installment is due September the 1st. So
So
people
you got creative and you found another source of income, which was good. Now,
absolutely.
after your first term, you ran for re-election. Were you opposed, or was it an acclamation in your
I I can't really. I think it might have been acclaimed. It might have been acclaimed.
in the second time? Okay, and then now you're back on council for a second term,
Second term of 2 years. Yeah.
and that's when now you've got enough seniority, we'll say, to get elected onto regional council along with the. Was it again the election amongst the councilors?
Yeah, that was pretty much a shoe-in then. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
think that I would be, because I was the chairman of the finance committee at Kitchener then.
yeah,
And yeah, so then, and when I got to the region, I guess regional people respected some of my ideas because then I became the regional finance chairman. So for basically 8 years, I was both City of Kitchener chairman and regional chairman.
Oh, that's a hell of a lot of work with all those budgets, because that's basically who creates the budgets that's presented to the rest of council to go over.
Yeah, well, I had a real interest in that too. Obviously my interest was to make sure that people understood and we were examining these various programs. And the toughest thing was, and of course you'd be aware of this, the regional budget, half of it is the police. So I
Yeah,
would have to sit
huge.
down with the police chief and his financial guy, which was Mr. Kingston, or Constable Kingston, or probably Sergeant Kingston. His son is a good friend of mine, Rick. And I would sit down and we would go through that line by line, and I'd be questioning, well, why do you need this? And I don't think they were used to that.
I don't think it's like that these days. Actually,
Probably not.
It's more like the police services board will put it all together, and then it's almost like a fait accompli when it comes to the regional council, and it's like accept it as it is or send it back. That's about it.
Well, and that's probably the way it was until I got there. And then I said, no, I want to sit down with you. I want you to explain it to me. I want you to, justify,
Right.
and what are you doing?
Yeah.
And,
So the zero based budgeting process wasn't being used by the region until you got there.
Yeah, I brought it from the city to the region. Yeah.
Okay.
We had it in both.
Yes. What was your views of the region overall?
Well, I always thought that the townships had too much influence in the region.
Yeah.
That was the one thing.
He says to a former mayor of North Dumfries Township.
And I realized that the regional chairman, and it started out as Jim Gray, but then
right.
Ceiling, Jim Gray was the first. And Jim Gray, actually, he became regional chairman. It was Jack Young, and then he retired. So when I got elected first to the city of Kitchener, Jim Gray was a councillor from Kitchener, and then he became elected. He became regional chairman. So then his seat became vacant, and Willie Ferguson ran in a by-election and won.
Oh, that's how Willie got on board.
That's how Willie got on, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so so then Gray retired, and then Ken Ceiling came on. And then, and Ken had been the mayor of Woolwich.
Yep.
And so, there was always sort of that battle. We were always sort of, battle. I mean, I respected Ken, but I would have liked, I never could get that, one or two extra votes because, the townships always went with Ken, and I was always trying to make some changes and tighten things up here and there maybe and make some changes. And it wasn't really a lot of success, although he would back my ideas for zero-based budgeting, I think, et cetera. But, it was just some other things that was.
Well, let me just ask you about that. It's an interesting point because I'm going to be doing a podcast with Brian Stortz. When he was a municipal councillor, which was after you, he came on the Kitchener scene. And we're going to talk about where they would make calls ahead of time to councillors to find out their positions on various issues before you got to council. It's almost like a horse trading situation, but not exactly. But was there much of that going on? This sort of discussions and sort of lobbying for support for motions prior to the meetings, or did you wait until you were at the meetings to figure all that out?
We didn't do a lot of that when I was on. I came on and then I seemed to have support within Kitchener anyways.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there wasn't a lot of that in the Kitchener Council. at the regional council, I never really did very much of that myself. I just sort of, I thought there, there were people that I would know that would sort of follow my lead. So I never really lobbied people per se.
What was just on the township thing, when you felt they had too much power, what was the issue with respect to the
Oh,
townships for you?
geez, I can't really remember. Well, certainly on budgets and that, they, as I said, they tended to always, as a group, side with Ken Sealing, who was the regional chairman. And so we didn't always agree on budgetary things. I don't know exactly what they were, but
Right,
we did
right,
not agree on those things. But I didn't win some of those fights. You know,
right.
I could never. If I
It was
couldn't,
a
if I
pretty,
didn't
it was a,
have
when I
feeling
was,
I wasn't going to win, I would always fall a vote short.
yeah. Well, Ken's a legend as being a good vote counter. But back then, I mean, when I was on regional council, we were, I think it was 16 people around the horseshoe. Do you recall approximately how many regional councilors there would have been during your time?
Well, I think there was more than that because it was
Yeah,
eight
yeah.
kids and probably, I don't know. Yeah, I think it was more than 16.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
They've
Because
reduced, they've reduced the councils. Yeah, before you got on, I think,
yeah,
didn't Mike Harris reduce the councils?
something like that. Yeah. So we've had some discussions, but yeah, it would get to be a pretty large situation. And how did you find the staff council dynamic on regional council?
Well, as the finance chairman, I mean, I got along really well with the finance people. I think, I could have been wrong, but I think I had the respect of, like, I was also on the engineering committee. I think I was the chairman of that, and at one time, and I never got involved with planning, but I think that the staff and I got along well because I think they appreciated the fact that I was taking a business approach to things,
Right.
and I didn't try to be a jack of all trades. I remember the first time I got the first package from the city of Kitchener. I mean, like, the thing was, it took you like all day to read it.
It's massive
And massive.
information.
And
Yeah.
then it didn't take me very long to realize that, I didn't want to read every piece of paper. I wanted to focus in on what I thought were important, and focus in on that and become knowledgeable. Well, for instance, the budgeting process. That was an interest, so I focused in on that. I talked to my brother, learned all about zero-based budgeting, and then I took it to the council. So I tended to be, focused in certain areas, and I'd let other counselors. So, one of the biggest problems is when you have a big council and everybody wants to talk on everything, all you do is spend a lot of time talking, and nobody has any expertise. So I like to just focus in, and then I'd let other people, so they
Right.
didn't have to lobby me. I would let other people talk about their issues.
Yeah.
And if I thought they knew what they were talking about, I mean, I would have a feeling, but I wasn't going to go into great depth on every issue.
Right.
I knew what I was interested in, what I thought the major issues were. I mean, it's the same way, I suppose, in university and law school. I mean, I focused in on what the question was going to be on the exam, and hopefully I spotted.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like that saying, you can be a jack of all trades and master of none. But if you focus in on the area that you're most interested in, then you're making probably more valuable contribution to the overall discussion and debate. Now, before I get to the center and the square to talk about that, just two things I want to talk about. First off, you were involved in the selection for the site for the city hall in Kitchener, correct?
Correct.
And that was you. And I think you said you and Richard Christie were seatmates around the Kitchener Horseshoe.
He was a new counselor, not the first time. The first 2 years it was Merv Villamere, and then Richard beat Merv.
Right, right, yeah.
And Merv was a great guy. I played golf a lot with Merv in later years, and Merv just a prince of a man. Actually,
Yes,
a very nice guy.
yeah,
But after that, I sat next to Richard for the rest of my term there because we could talk, and he was intellectually interesting to talk to and had good ideas. So if he was talking about something like on planning issues and that, I would tend to side with him.
right.
I knew that, and once again, he was focused on his issues. I was focused on mine.
Yes,
So,
yes,
I
yeah.
was focused on the financial side. So he would listen to me, and I would listen to him on the planning issues.
And I've had him on the podcast a couple of times, and we've talked about. He was sort of chairing the committee that did the site selection, I believe.
Yeah, I can't remember, but probably, yeah.
Yeah, and it was an interesting decision. How did you feel about the location for the city hall? Because he said the alternative site was the farmers market, where the
Well, yeah,
Kitchener Farmers Market is.
we had focused in on the ultimate site where it's now. And then somebody came up with this idea of moving it down to the other end. And there was, there was some sort of it was sort of a bit of a scruffy neighborhood down there. There was some scruffy bars. I know the criminal lawyers used to like to go to this one bar because they'd be able to meet their clients and generate business. That's when you're a criminal lawyer, you need to generate business. You go to a really scuzzy bar.
Right.
You meet clients by handing out your cards there. Maybe I'm being too hard on the criminal lawyers.
Maybe.
Got to be able to laugh at these things.
Yeah, no, they'd like it. They'd laugh too. But but you weren't in favor of that location down at the East End.
Somebody came. I don't know who came up with that idea, and I think certainly Richard wasn't in favor. I was in favor of that. I thought, hey, we've spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
This is the location we want. Because they thought that is more of an urban development, get some.
Yeah.
And then they put the market down there, so that made sense. They got.
Yeah, it worked out. It sort of bookends the downtown core. So the other thing before we get to Center in the Square is industrial parks, and I'm guessing from your experience with the land bank, you had some interest in developing the industrial park concept in the city of Kitchener.
Yeah, so I pushed, the Trillium Park. I mean, we had Bud Automotive down there, but I pushed Trillium and was always interested in the city buying up industrial land, which wasn't popular with some councillors, but I was always able to get that. And then I think the final thing that I was involved in buying was there was an old, I think it was called the Kitchener Golf Course, which was sort of at the end of Lancaster and wedged in between Lancaster and Wellington, that area now that's all developed. And there's,
the Yellow Pages building and Ernst and Young and all these guys. Yeah.
That's the name of the street there. But yeah, so that was sort of one of the last pieces I think we're able to put together is
and they've all been very successful. It reminds me, when I was mayor, I used to get together with Ron Eddy down at the County of Brant, the mayor down at the County of Brant. And Ron would always talk about, they had an industrial park that they purchased a large piece of land on the 403. It actually had gone bankrupt and the municipality bought it. And he took a lot of heat for that initial purchase, but eventually it got sold out. And just the property tax revenue that they pulled in from that justified the purchase many times over.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing was when I was first elected, I went to a new councillor or new alderman's seminar down in Brantford. And Judy Balmer and I drove down in a snowstorm, actually. And my cousin was one of the presenters at it. My cousin is Hazel McCallion, the former mayor of Mississauga.
That's right. I forgot about that.
and she gave a very good presentation. I talked to her. She's from the Gaspé Coast too. And anyways, we had a good discussion. And of course, Mississauga has been incredibly successful with their development of land banks, etc. Land development generally. And of course, she was instrumental in getting levies for soft services, having the new development pay for the
right.
He also was instrumental in getting them to pay for the soft services, the arenas, the libraries and stuff like that. And I guess that's where, I get some of the fiscal interest, but being fiscally conservative, because I'm sure like Hazel coming from the Gaspé Coast probably would have been a liberal. Because everybody's a liberal, because you don't have any other choice. I mean, there's not a lot of choice between the separatists and
yes,
and the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
And I don't know what her politics are, because I mean, I know that in one election she was sort of making fun of Stephen Harper and with older people, and then in the next election she's friends with Doug Ford and she's promoting Doug Ford. So I think she's probably like me, sort of in the middle there, and just
a true municipal politician. We can be one way one day, another way the other way. It's how do we feel?
Yeah, absolutely. And but fiscally conservative, as she used to say, like I spend my money, I spend the city's money like very frugally, like my own money.
Yeah, that's many municipal politicians say that. Yes,
that's right. So that was sort of my mantra too, and
right.
She just turned 100 in February, actually.
I know, it's fantastic.
And she's still as sharp as a tack and still as busy. I remember the funny thing was, Rick Mercer interviewed her on the comedy thing, and she had just been hit by a pickup truck. And he asked her, he said, well, how are you feeling? I understand that you just had this, were hit by a pickup truck crossing the road. And she said, well, why are you asking me how I'm feeling? Why don't you ask how the pickup truck feels? So
classic.
So.
Classic line. So, okay, let's talk about Center in the Square. That was a major project during your time on council.
Yeah, just, I mean, it had been worked on before I got elected, and the counselor that had done tremendous work on that was a gentleman called Bob Wagner. And he was going off council, but he wanted to know where I stood on it. And I said, well, I'm behind it 100%. And it wasn't a popular thing. I mean, there was lots of councillors that split, like Willie, and a lot of, I don't think Willie was in favor, and other people weren't, obviously,
Yeah.
because it was expensive, and we didn't know how it would work. But that was something that, well, we got it passed.
Yeah.
It wasn't an easy pass, but we got it passed. And
it was tight votes all the way, wasn't it?
oh yeah, it was always like by one vote. I don't think we ever got, we never got more than, we always had the one vote, and that was basically it. So
what were the objections to the center and the square?
Well, probably the cost, and whether it would be used, and I mean, a lot of the backers behind it, were the symphony was obviously a major backer, the art gallery, but the symphony, and so the more labor orientated members of the council, I mean, that's really not their cup of tea.
Right.
So
right.
That was a lot of it had to do with the cost and who was going to use it and whether it would be used, etc. So it was a bit of a battle. And
when I was chatting with my friend Brian Stortz, because we were talking about, he had to deal with the city hall after, and how close the votes were that, and he had mentioned that the votes were really close for the center and the square. But so tell us, I mean, the operation, so the center and square got built and it was operating during your time. So, there were issues going on there's always seemed to be issues about the operating costs, right?
Well, that's right, because we would have to, there'd be a big grant to the center and the square. And that always was controversial with a lot of, with the people that were in favor of it and weren't in favor of supporting it. So as the finance chairman, I said, the optics of this just isn't good, because it's the headline in the paper is always the center and the square runs this huge deficit, etc. So I said, the optics aren't good. So what we want to do is we want to change how we finance this. We want to give the center and the square money, and then then whether they run a deficit or they run positive, it's off what we give them. So that's not the topic. So it doesn't appear that we're giving them like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
You just give that to them. That's up front. That's built in. And then whether they're positive or negative, whether they're losing money or making money, okay, that's what's reflected in the discussion. So that it just made it, the optics, optics are so important in politics, as you know. I mean, the optics just made it a lot more palatable to people.
Well, and this was a project that the city of Kitchener undertook on its own. It wasn't something that what was the region participation? Because this seems like it would be an anchor for the region.
I don't think there was a regional participation. It was the city of Kitchener.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the region now, I think we were able to get like the region to give a grant to it.
Right, to help out.
People, obviously, I mean, a lot of the people that use it are actually from Waterloo. We had the same problem, of course, with our pools and our libraries. I mean, Waterloo had no pools, and their library was a lot smaller than Kitchener. So the people from Waterloo would be able to come to the Kitchener library.
Yeah.
And take books out there. They would go to our pools, and that was a big stumbling block too, because people would line up with lawn chairs in the middle of the night so they could get their children registered, like Forest Heights Pool, into swimming classes. And yet people from Waterloo taking spots. So, I made sure that we changed that. It didn't make me very popular with Waterloo, but I made sure that we changed that so that, Waterloo, after everybody in Kitchener has got their chance to register their
right.
They're paying for the maintenance and upkeep of these pools. Then if there's room over, we'll take you. But, and it was the same with the library. Why are we having this fantastic library, which we did have, and people from Waterloo using it free of charge? So we said, no, and if you're going to use our facility like the pool, you're going to have to pay more.
Well, I was a kid growing up in Waterloo. I would go down to the Kitchener Center Library all the time for research or whatever. And I know my friend Alex is a big booster of the Kitchener Center Library as well.
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic library, and that was but Waterloo was would promote this great idea that their taxes are lower in Waterloo, etc. And yet, it was lower because they didn't provide the same services, and their people were coming to Kitchener to get the services that Waterloo wasn't providing.
Yeah, I guess you got to set a line, because I mean, you're answering to the voters of Kitchener, right? I mean, that's
absolutely. And why are we, and of course that would get me in trouble with Marjorie Carroll, who was the mayor of Waterloo, and she would She did.
So let me ask you though, Center in the Square. Okay, I had a brief involvement with some local theater group, and I know they put on a performance at Center in the Square. But the comment that I picked up, even like in the past few years, was how expensive it is to use the facility at Center in the Square, because there's some theater space that I guess is sort of a community theater space or something like that. What can you tell me about that?
Well, there was a concert, like a hall behind, a lovely facility behind the main area.
Yes.
And the mistake we made, unfortunately, was that the person, I think the chairman of the board at the Center in the Square, who we appointed at the board, had been a labor negotiator.
Okay.
And he negotiated the labor contract, and it was a bad contract. I mean, it was just a bad contract. We should have had it professionally done. That was the mistake that the board made. We should have had it done by the city. It should have been professionally done. And we should have made sure that we excluded that back hall somehow. Because it's incredibly expensive. The labor union, I mean, the labor costs were so high there that no community group could afford to use it.
Yeah.
It just, it was ridiculous. So here we had built this thing specifically. It was like a rehearsal hall or whatever. And, it could be used for all these community groups, and never could be because nobody could afford it because the union contract was so rich. And, they get paid, like 5 minutes over, they're getting, there's a lot of things. Now, I know nothing about labor contracts, etc., but I know enough that, you have to have it professionally done. And we thought this gentleman knew, but there's a bad contract.
Yeah, because I mean, the acoustics are praised for Center in the Square. I mean, the technical aspects of it. And it would have been, an awesome facility for community groups to use because they have no money to do much, and it's very hard.
That was really a great disappointment, and
Yeah.
it still doesn't probably get used. That's why the Conrad Center's down on King Street, where the symphony, does a lot of stuff there.
Right.
You couldn't use this rehearsal hall, etc., because of the labor costs. And once a union's got a contract, you're not going to change it.
So Don, why did you stop after 1989?
Well, I mean, I just believed in term limits. I mean, I got on the council because I wanted to make a contribution to the community.
Yeah.
I didn't see it as a job. I didn't see it as a career.
Right.
And of course, in those days, you could be a city councilor and obviously a regional council and still carry on a law practice.
Yeah.
You work night and day, and I was always running from my office, which was on Frederick Street, down to the city hall, and we're walking across the street to where the regional council chambers were, right across the street in the courthouse, in the old courthouse.
Yeah.
But I just saw it as, you made a contribution. You didn't do it for the money because the money wasn't that good, but you made a contribution, then you got out.
Yeah.
And after 10 years, I thought, well, time to get out. And also my friend told me that, people are thinking you, as a politician, and it hurt my business because some people, they would rather have me, my vote on the council rather than having my legal expertise, because
Gotcha.
they couldn't get a vote on the council, and I was certainly a pro-business type of
Sure.
William Industrial Park, etc. But with some of these clients, road builders, etc., I declare a conflict.
Yeah.
And so that was something that was was a problem, declaring the conflicts and that. So they would get other lawyers, and then I would just be.
Well, that's what I had the conflict when the Ion was getting built, and you and I were part owners of that building on Duke Street.
Yeah, exactly.
And with the stops nearby, so I couldn't participate in any of that. But also too, I think you appreciate new people, new ideas, right, coming in.
Yeah, exactly. I think, by the time after 9.5 years, I just thought, I started saying what people said to me in the first place. Oh, well, we've done that before. We've thought about that, and I thought, well, no, when you start saying that, it's time to leave. You want to get fresh ideas, fresh people in there. And I don't think it should be a full-time job. I mean, it shouldn't be a career job.
Right.
That's what it appears to become.
Well, it seems like it for some people. Yes, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Don, what was for your 10 years in there, what was the thing that you're probably most proud about in municipal politics?
Well, I think, probably it was just the fiscal responsibility and assisting the city develop with the Trillium Industrial Parks, et cetera, to assist the city develop and bring sort of more knowledgeable, more accountability to the financial side of the cities.
Yeah. Well, listen, Don, we're going to wrap it up on that point, okay, on that note. And I just want to thank you for sharing your stories with us today. It was a lot of fun. So this has been another edition of the Old Grey Mayors podcast. I want to thank you for having listened and tagged along with us. If you want to hear from someone in the community that you think would be an excellent guest for this podcast, let me know and we will be happy to try and make that happen. And if you really like what you hear, you can subscribe and be informed of future Old Grey Mayor podcasts. Thanks again. All the best.